There we go. Cool. So we're here live, and I thought it was, pretty important to me, and it's come to my attention that it's important to quite a number of other folks. I'm still working on getting my technology in order here to do live stream across multiple platforms. But there's been a lot of people who've been asking me to come out and talk about being a medical cannabis patient and being a person in recovery. And we don't have any meetings that are dedicated to supporting this community in this way. I brought this up at the state level in a number of meetings. I work as a recovery advocate. It's a big part of my life. And there's been a lot of just kicking the can down the road for us. There isn't any recognition at the federal level. It's virtually impossible to get health services funded to support the needs of cannabis patients, particularly cannabis patients who are in recovery. So there is no residential treatment that's available that recognizes this form of treatment. There's no recovery residence currently where people can go and receive support while they're participating in a medical cannabis program. And there's a lot of stigma to unpack around it because for many, many, many years, we have existed in a world which has thought of cannabis as an illicit substance and has thought of cannabis as, being kind of like the devil's milk. And so there's a lot of fear around how people choose to use this program and how people pursue recovery while in this program. And I think it's really important that people out there know and understand that it's okay. It's okay to be a patient and be in recovery. All of our literature supports it. Snickers, he wants to be in the middle of everything all the time. I love Snickers, but sometimes it's not your show. All right, fine. You can come sit over here. All right. Hold on one second. Get the cat butt out of the way. All right, there we go. See, and just like that, we've gone from 1 to 2, right? So, hey, Snickers. So I want to talk with you guys a little bit because this is the first meeting that I'm hosting, and I hope that more of you can join me for these meetings because I will be hosting them every week, every Monday at 8 p.m. So I hope you guys are able to come out and enjoy the meetings, that you participate. We got a group on Facebook called Cannabis Assisted Recovery. I encourage people to start some dialogue in there and, turn to the community for the support that you need, in your recovery. And I just want to encourage people to not feel like they need to hide their treatment or to conceal any part of their life. A big part of my recovery has been, rigorous honesty and accountability. And that's a really important, set of mechanisms that help us to, not only achieve recovery, but to sustain recovery. We need the support of the people around us. It's when we feel the need to conceal and hide and run away, with all the, when we internalize our shame, we don't talk about it. We get sick. We get very sick. And that's a big part of what this book here has done for me. And I'll use this book a lot. And I have a bunch of other books, right? And so you're welcome to take it or leave it for what it's worth. I try to look at the collective wisdom of the people who have, done this work before me, and to find my own way to incorporate that into my life. And for every person, I think it's important to note that it's different. We're not all the same. We've all had very different experiences that have brought us to addiction, and there are very different things that drive our addictions. So it's not a one-size-fit-all process, and I think that's important. That message is shared and it's spread. That we continue to work on embracing diversity and recovery, that we continue to promote a culture that recognizes what recovery actually is, which is not strictly abstinence. And unfortunately, for a lot of our community, that has been the dominant trend of recovery. But the reality is that the vast majority of people who enter recovery do so on their own, of their own accord, without the assistance of any mutual aid or treatment for that matter. More than 70% of the people who were surveyed recently who identified with being in recovery identified with, more so with being in some sort of self-initiated, self-sustained, um, and more oftentimes than not, a moderation-based form of recovery, not an abstinence-based form of recovery. And so this kind of touches on why cannabis, right? So for many of us, it's been a difficult road, where we've gotten to where we got to. For me and my recovery, just because we're starting now, I'm going to try to qualify with you guys a little bit before we get into some more of the literature and studying the different programs and learning about, what might work for you as a cannabis patient in recovery, without having to deal with the additional stigma and marginalization and discrimination that seems to be occurring in a lot of these rooms, and that people seem to be encountering. I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of people that have been very understanding and who have been very open-minded, for me to talk a little bit more openly about my recovery. And I think it's really important that I get to share that gift with all of you out there, because now I recognize not everybody is in a position where they can be as honest and as open, about, the way that I have been about my own recovery. So I just want to encourage other people to be able to do the same. Um, and that kind of touches on some things that really mean a lot to me. Anonymity has not been a cornerstone of my recovery. I came out of the entertainment world. I worked, for years in the entertainment industry. I was a performing artist. Worked on production. I've worked on some really big shows. I was very fortunate to be involved with the Woodstock Music Festival, and so I've been invited back each year, and each year it gets bigger and bigger, and I'm really excited about the things that have happened around me and how people have been inspired, by my recovery, and continue to be a force for good in that community. And the moral of this, the lesson here is that, I don't have to live my life in fear. I don't have to be fearful. I don't have to be afraid of, whether or not the next drink or the next drug is going to overpower me or to take my life, because I found something that's worked. And when I say that I've recovered in the past tense, it really genuinely means that. I don't, there was a time in my life where I could not put a drink down, and it was a terrifying experience, knowing that there were consequences, knowing that there was pretty high stakes for me at a time in my life. I had probably about 21 years hanging over my head, and I couldn't stop. I could not stop. I tried everything. I could not stop. And then finally, with the help of a community of people who I could identify with, I was able to figure out what I needed to do. And a big part of that process for me was surrender. Was really just accepting the fact that I didn't have this thing. It wasn't mine to beat, and I needed to find something else to help me beat it. And part of that was the community, and part of that was, finding my purpose, and part of that was, having something to believe in. When some people call it a higher power, I don't even get as abstract as that. For me, it was really about having something, someone, something beyond myself that I could believe in, and it didn't have to be even an entity. For me, it really became about, the work that I found myself doing, volunteering in harm reduction, and helping out at this homeless shelter and this needle exchange, and doing some good things for other people. And I became consumed by the pursuit of that and the ambition to continue to make myself available with all the things that I had gone through. I felt that I really needed to do this for the community. Um, so I guess where I should probably start is how I got into the journey. So why cannabis? Why is cannabis a part of my life? How did that happen? And I think for each of us is different, but I think it's important that we understand the journey, because the journey is a part of our identity as people in recovery. It's not. It doesn't promote wellness for us to suppress our experiences or to deny them. I think that's really important to say here. So for me, I had gone through a really hard young development life. Um, I had experienced a lot of trauma at a young age, a lot of trauma. And I found that as I grew older, that as I didn't deal with those traumas and I didn't unpack that stuff and I didn't really know what to do, um, that the easy answer was really to pick up a drink. And that's what I did for a very long time. And as my my mental health got worse, as my physical health got worse, the doctors tried to do what they could and prescribe me medications. And so, this went on. And so there, at a certain point, there were a lot of combinations of really volatile chemicals that were, kind of parading around my body. And then add a little montage of some illicit substances to the mix. Ironically, not a whole lot of cannabis at the time. So this was going on. I'd gone into the army, gotten out of the army. My friends, a bunch of my buddies from my unit were involved in an attack, and a bunch of them were killed in action and taken POW. And I took it really hard. I took it really hard to heart. And then on top of all that, they lost my paperwork. So I couldn't work. I couldn't get a place to live. I lived outside. I ended up having a crossing over a death experience when I was kind of going back and forth between America and Mexico. I'd gotten sick with dysentery, and so over time I finally drifted my way back up to New England, where my family was in Connecticut, and they had never really had a very active role in my life, as far as um, supporting me in a particular way. They were supportive, but growing up, I didn't grow up with my parents. I grew up in a state group home. The majority of my young adult life was institutionalized, and that's a whole separate topic I could probably talk for an hour about. But so long story short, I wound up finally getting inside. I wound up not being homeless for the first time in a long time, and that really kind of triggered a lot of things to happen with my mental health. And despite being on just prescription drugs and alcohol, the combination of those and my mental health, it was a disaster. And so I found myself in this single room occupancy. I had become convinced that the government was going to come and get me. I go down a gambit of things I convinced myself, but I convinced myself of a lot of things. And so I felt that I needed to, conduct a mass execution. That was the only way I was going to get out of this, was if I just killed everybody in the government, just destroyed them all, and started making a list, started amassing firearms. And for the first time in my life, my adult life, that my parents really got involved. They got concerned. My cousin had, shared this message with them about what was going on at my house, and they came over and they staged an intervention. And my goodness, it's that time of night where it gets hard for me with my medical condition without taking my medicine. And I didn't want to just do that openly without talking with all of you first about how you felt about that. But I think, probably in future meetings that I probably want to welcome people to, feel comfortable participating in their treatment during meetings if it's needed. Medically, right now I'm resisting that urge to treat myself, even though I'm experiencing a pretty high level of discomfort and I can't breathe out of my nose at all. So if I sound like I'm miserable, it's because I'm not particularly comfortable at all right now. And so going back to my narrative, my parents staged this intervention, and they flew me out to California, and I got to California, and I met these guys working at this pizza shop. Um, Dougie, and I can't remember the other one's name, I think John. And they were working at a dispensary. And I had no experience whatsoever with this kind of treatment or, what it could offer me. But I knew that the things that I had tried didn't work. All the gambit of the medications the doctors had given me, those didn't work. And, there were still some things going on that weren't diagnosed yet. I'm going to get to that later in my story, but I'm very grateful that for the decision I made back then to say yes and be willing to and open to exploring the alternative, because I grew up institutionalized. This wasn't something that I had chosen for my life. This wasn't something I wanted for myself. It was driven by an experience of severe failure of my internal health, irrespective of substance use, combined with a need to do something proactively about that and to have like the greatest quality of life that I could experience while receiving treatment for the various conditions that afflicted me. And there's a fairly good list of those. So at this stage of my life, I finally started to get diagnosed with PTSD, which took forever. They thought I was bipolar. They didn't really do a very good job of evaluating me as a young person, having experienced a lot of trauma, and just so there was a lot of misdiagnosis that happened in the process. And so I was treated for the wrong things for a very long time. So this was the first time I had a genuine conversation with people about my trauma, where I wasn't told that they were flights of fancy or some. These were just things I had lived through, things I had experienced when I was at the group home, things I had experienced when I was on the street, and it was hard. It was hard for me growing up. So, I got involved with this program. I started working at the dispensary, and started to participate, but I was really, really hesitant. I was very skeptical about the benefits and how to use the treatment. There was a big lack of knowledge on my part. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was just very skeptical. And of course, at the time when I landed in California, I was still drinking. So this hasn't quite brought me to where my recovery started, but just to put it in perspective, this was about 12 years ago. So for me, this journey started quite some time ago. So I'm working at the dispensary, maybe my second week there. I was working maybe 1 or 2 days a week. I had 3 jobs. So I'm in there. It's my second week. They just finished training me on how to use the aeroponics cloning system and the cloning gel, and how to do that whole process for cultivation. And that's when I met my first glaucoma patient. And this gentleman came in, and he had a CNI dog. He had his sunglasses on inside, and he came in. He sat down, and they asked me to help him to roll him a joint because he couldn't see. So I did that. So I rolled the man a joint. I'd been smoking cigarettes for years and rolling my own Bali shag for years, and so I knew how to roll. So that wasn't hard. So I did that, and I gave it to him. And I was still fixated on the aeroponics cloning system. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those things, but it's kind of like this space age technology where the plants are grown, suspended in the air. And it's really neat. It's very fascinating to just look at the process. So I spent a lot of time looking at this thing, right? So I'm kind of looking over here, and he's sitting over here, and he's smoking his joint. And so I just remember looking over and looking down. Not even looking at him directly, but just looking over and looking down. And I saw him petting his dog. And he could see, and it took me a minute, because it didn't dawn on me right away what had changed. It was something very subtle. I was watching him pet his dog, and then I realized that he had taken his sunglasses off. and he was looking at his dog. And I paused because I was very confused. I didn't know anything about glaucoma. I had no idea what cannabis did for glaucoma patients. No awareness at all. So here I am witnessing this for the first time. And I kid you not, like I almost started to cry because of how profoundly it affected me. To realize that this person who was spending their life walking around this world without the ability to see could come in and, with the help of a simple person like myself, not really doing much, taking a plant, drying it, and sticking it in something so he can consume it, then all of a sudden this man could see. And you know, it felt to me like if I had just, when I was looking the other way at this aeroponics cloning system, that, you know, Jesus himself had walked into the room and put his hands on this guy and cured him and snuck out the room in the time it took me to turn my head one way and the other, and I must have just missed it as it was happening. But the truth was, it was just the medicine. This was what the plant was doing for this person. And from that day forward, I took my treatment a lot more seriously. You know, I saw what the plant could do for people. And for me, you know, I was able to internalize that and accept it, that this was really something radical. This was something that people have been given a whole bunch of misinformation about, you know, that we haven't really dug into, you know, developing our knowledge about the uses of this plant. But, you know, what started with with me seeing what this plant did for this other person, now, years down the road, the plants now help me to, you know, move away from drinking, and I was able to finally quit cigarettes with the help of my cannabis, my medication, and I've continued to make improvements on my life with the help of this medicine. And, you know, a number of years ago now, but at the time, you know, it didn't seem like that long ago, but it has been a number of years. You know, I finally got diagnosed with the health condition, which has been just making my life miserable. And, you know, part of it was the drunk, but part of it was genuinely just physical discomfort, like a high level of physical discomfort. And for people that don't have chronic health conditions, you don't understand what that's like. You don't get relief. Even the relief that you get from a medication is not, it's not full, genuine relief. There is no perfect fix. What it does do is it makes the suffering that you deal with minute to minute of every single day of your life a little bit more manageable. So you don't feel like you want to throw yourself off a building because of how miserable you are. You know, I have days where, you know, things swell up. The reason why I can't breathe, most likely, the big part of it, you know, there are some physical problems, and I'm having surgery next week. So part of me is grateful that I'm starting to do this because, you know, I want to expand my recovery support and my community and continue to keep myself accountable to, you know, the commitments I've made to my own recovery. And it's a high risk time for me, you know, where I'm going through a surgery to hopefully fix some things. And who knows whether it'll work or, you know, how long it will help for. But, you know, the most important part of this for me is, you know, I finally get to share my story and to help other people to share their stories and to talk about how this plan has really helped me incredibly, saved my life for starters. I mean, the places I was at before I got involved with these people and this program, you know, I was on a fast track lane to, you know, the multiple homicide, suicide scenario. And that's where my life was when this journey started. You know, I was definitely and justifiably the exact description of the person that you would want to be putting in prison to protect your society from. And I have not felt for 1 minute in the time that I've been in this recovery that I am that person, that I meet that description. And so the transformative part of this experience for me has been just miraculous. And the quality of the life that I have today because of that is incomparable. I can't compare it to anything. I have the blessings of my life, the promises, everything that they say about the program. Whether or not I've consumed cannabis, it's my treatment, it's between me and my doctor. But my life has been evidence of the miracles that have happened around me. And there is no way that I could reconcile where I was to where I am now, and that the improvement to my global health has been drastic. And I can say that with all honest truth. So the condition I wound up being diagnosed with was a condition called ankylosing spondylitis. It took years for them to finally diagnose me with this properly, because it's a rare condition. It's a rare condition, and so the cannabis has become a part of my maintenance for that condition. And just a little bit of daily maintenance. I use a process called microdosing, which is really important for me to maintain my commitments to recovery. That I use once a day at night before bed. No problem. Go to bed. I wake up. With ankylosing, one of the big problems with the progression of the disease is at night. There's really high levels of systemic inflammation, and that those are most prevalent at night. So it's really important that I have, particularly plants that are high prevalence of CBD. There's a number of other terpenes that are involved in that. But it's not just the cannabis that I've made a part of my lifestyle. It's one small piece of it. And I want to stress that, because it's not just cannabis that supports my recovery. It's, the robust social network that I have around me. It's my commitment to talking about and living the principles of my recovery. And part of that is my honesty. And, really making an effort to change the way that I live, getting proper sleep at night, having a good diet. For me, where I have lots of inflammatory issues, I have to, eat lots of berries. Dark berries in particular are extremely helpful for those kinds of conditions. So I have to say that what this medicine has done for me is miraculous, in the way that it's, treated a condition which, prior to my participation in the program, has traditionally been treated with a combination of Humira, anti-inflammatories, naproxen in particular, muscle relaxers to try to compensate for some of that, and opiate narcotics for pain management. And so that has been the mainline regimen. There have been years where I've gone back and forth because of legal challenges around access, to go back into traditional treatment, where they've tried combinations of different drugs, and they've been through the whole gambit with me several times. There really is not a better solution for me to have the maximum amount of output, my ability to be competent and alert and aware and participatory in my life. So my greatest global health comes from my responsible participation in this program. And I hope I can share a little bit of wisdom with people about how that works, because there isn't a lot of good community education about how to make a responsible use of the medical cannabis program. And a lot of my recovery advocacy around this has been really to try to help educate people about what the program is, what the medicine can offer, what it does, what it doesn't do, and how every person has to have a different way of using the medicine based on their individual biochemistry. And it's very complex, and we don't have anywhere near the amount of science that we need to really be as effective as we can with this. But what I can say is that it has helped a lot of people incredibly. Yet at the same time, this same group of people that meet a particular description, that need access to recovery support, have been kept out of membership with the community, and ostracized and alienated and criticized. And I could run through a whole gambit of different statements that have been made to me over the course of my recovery, and being very vocal and very public about this. From people demanding that I not talk to their people who are in recovery, to people telling me that I'm not even in recovery. I'm not even allowed to speak in a meeting. I mean, to be told that you're not allowed to speak as a person in recovery, that should not happen. That should not happen. Part of this experience for us as people in recovery is recognizing that we need a community of people around us, and a community that's going to love us, to accept us, to embrace us, to hold us accountable, to develop trusting relationships that are built on more than just, the commerce of a drug economy. And I think that it's really important to talk about these things, and for people to be more accepted by their community. Because as we continue to understand more about recovery, we understand that recovery isn't just the 12-step program in abstinence. And for the majority of people, it's not. Particularly for people with chronic illness. And for us, it's not a choice. Whether we have to choose between methadone for pain management or Suboxone for pain management, or the good old suck it up and deal with it type of pain management, which doesn't usually work too well for most of us. That's how we ended up here. And particularly for people like me who have struggled with opiates and benzos and alcohol, those drugs aren't safe for me to use. So I had to find something else. And I'm really, really grateful that in my life today I've found something else. And all I want is for people to accept that, and to accept that I can be both a person in long-term recovery and also be a patient, and that's okay, right? So I wanted to just qualify with you folks a little bit, because this is our first time doing this, and to talk about what I've been through. It's been a hard road. I've had to open my mouth a lot when people weren't ready for me to open my mouth, but I had to do it because nobody else was really doing it. I get a lot of people that have come to me since I started doing this to quietly thank me. They don't come out. In the public face, I have a lot of criticism, but in the private sphere, I have the same. Sometimes it's even the same people, that are publicly saying one thing and then coming to me in private and thanking me and telling me their own story. And there are a lot of those stories out there. And so I just want to encourage you folks out there, to be brave. I want you to continue to have a place to come, to be here, so we can talk about recovery. And I think that that's important, because recovery is what's continued to keep me safe, and it's continued to give my life purpose. And I just want to be able to share that passion with other people, and really help people to love and embrace and accept each other in the way that we should, because it's the right thing to do. We don't get into this. It is selfish to a certain extent. We get into this because we're desperate to stop. But then when you get past that, the gift of desperation, what comes after? And a lot of that is what this book will tell you, and we'll go through this book. We're gonna start maybe a little bit today with the doctor's letter, and then I have some other books that I really like. Hopefully we'll get into doing some of this stuff, because I love this stuff. And I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from each other, from the different cultures that have emerged, and how they've dealt with these things differently. And I think, for my own personal recovery, that's how I built my foundation, is by drawing on all these different cultures and experiences, and just finding what works best for me. So I just want to encourage the people that are out there, they're watching this, that are listening, that just because I do this way doesn't mean you have to do this way. In fact, I would encourage you to do it your own way, and then share it. Let us learn from what you're doing, and join our group, and let's talk about that. And I'd love to be able to bring those points up, in future meetings, because this is a meeting. This isn't just me talking at you. Like my friend Albert joined us and, thanked me and gave me a big thumbs up and said, I'm doing a great job educating people. And I think honestly, the best education comes from each other. When we come together as a group of people, we can listen and we can talk, safely with one another and be heard. And I think that is just so important. And for a lot of people who have, been cannabis patients also seeking recovery, they haven't felt heard. That's a lot of what I've heard from other patients who, they're scared at this point. People are intimidated by the presence of the abstinence-based recovery community, and these are people that really need the community. They need the support. They need to be accepted. And so I'm willing to step out and break from my anonymity because I don't believe that anonymity is the direction we need to be going. I think that this is where I break from the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll say this right now, that I'm not doing this as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous or to represent anything to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. But, I do offer certain critiques of that literature because I do use a lot of it in my personal recovery. And I want to be able to share that with you, my personal recovery. And a big part of that has been breaking from anonymity. And, when I felt there was a certain point in my life where I hit a turning point as a public figure, an advocate, and an artist. And I came to a realization that the anonymity was working against what the recovery community wanted to do and needed to do to move forward. And a part of that is fear-based. There's a lot of fear that the movement would come undone, that the opponents of the movement would get a foothold and destroy what we were doing. It would take away from the purity of the intent. I just want to emphasize that as people in recovery, we get it. Like, there's no purer intent than the desperation of not wanting to use so you don't die, right? You can politic till you're blue in the face, but there is no purer intent than just pure survival and doing whatever's necessary to survive. And that's what a lot of us have done. We've all done it a little bit differently. And so now we're in the realm of, okay, well, we've allowed anonymity to keep us separated. We've allowed anonymity to keep us divided. And from engaging in a meaningful way with the public and with our government, democracy itself is run by the presence of the voice of the people. And when you structure anonymity into a program that collectively organizes people, builds a community, supportive community for people to heal, but then you can't connect that to be reflected in policy or treatment or any number of other modalities, services that support people in recovery, then we've created a flawed system or a flawed approach. And I just want to challenge the people who are out there that really ruggedly adhere to this process to just reimagine for yourself, right? So this is a program that was written almost 100 years ago. Very different culture, very different political climate, but also a very fundamentally different scientific knowledge, that we did not have access to an understanding of this disease that supported integration of services, integration of community, and integration of understanding illness. Like, we don't silo any other condition the way that we silo dealing with an addiction. And a big part of that is the imposed stigma that comes from this rugged adherence to the traditions. And so I think that there's got to be some conversation had about why are they there? What could we do instead? How could we do it better? Not that it's wrong, but how could we do it better? Because our understanding has evolved. Our society has evolved. And again, going back to things that have changed, right? So we no longer consider cannabis to be a drug for some people. It's medicine. So with that spirit of just breaking from our historic understandings, instead taking what we've learned from those understandings and incorporating them and integrating them into a new understanding of recovery, and an understanding of recovery that embraces the genuine underlying principles of that recovery, what the people that wrote these books really intended, for people to connect, for people to be embraced, for people not to be marginalized, but to have a safe place to go and talk about what they're experiencing and not have it be a negative on their life. Because at that time when these people were dealing with this, alcoholics, the way that they would treat mental illness, I mean, you could be lobotomized. You literally would have the very thoughts in your brain taken from you. Your executive function would be destroyed. So there was a very real and viable threat to the safety of these people who are coming forward just to get help. And we just don't live in that world anymore. And we shouldn't continue to live in that world for the people that use other forms of substances besides alcohol. And that's a whole separate topic that we could talk about for another several hours. But I think what's important to note here is that we've started to genuinely move away from that understanding. And we've embraced the concept of a disease model of addiction. We've embraced ideas that support expanding a continuum of care. And that includes community-based organizations, and it includes mutual aid. And that's exactly what this is. This is me engaging directly with the community through technology, through online innovation. This is, again, advancement. We've evolved. And not having to hide behind my anonymity, to be able to break from the shame of that, to move away from that internalized stigma and really just to be okay with being a person with a chronic illness. Like, I don't have to be ashamed about admitting that I have ankylosing spondylitis and I need treatment. I don't have to be ashamed about being a trauma survivor and having post-traumatic stress disorder. So why should I be ashamed of having survived, having a chronic illness like addiction? And I shouldn't. That's the bottom line here, is I shouldn't. And it's that same shame that fuels the fear that I hear from so many people that come through the rooms because it's threaded into the program. The fear that lay underneath all of these things, right? The same fear that drives our stigma. In order for us to undo the stigma, we have to confront and address the underlying fears. There are people that are baffled, when I tell them, I go work in a bar on a regular basis. And I know a lot of other people in recovery, too, that do a similar thing. I don't feel compelled to drink. I could be more turned off by the drink because of doing the process, like doing the work of recovering from my illness. Part of it was medication. Part of it was my own wellness, improving my global health. And then part of it has been maintenance. Part of it has been work on my own part to understand what my disease was, what was making me sick, and then how to address that. How to be proactive about it, and not let it control my life. And when I figured that out, kind of like I can identify a little bit with some of the diabetes patients. And I know some diabetes patients might be offended by this, and please just take it at face value. It's not a judgmental statement towards people who are diabetics. But the point being that the management of the disease is no more radical or extraordinary than the way in which people have to manage their blood sugar differently, depending on their unique biochemistry, depending on the causes that have made them ill. Some of them are you could say they're self-induced, even by poor diet. You could say that some of them were more genetic. There's definitely a variance of components that lead to different types of diabetes, and not all of them people have any control over, at least not on like a moral or a judgment basis, but more on a health management basis, where somebody might need to administer themselves shots of insulin in order to manage their blood sugar. And some people go on medication for a short time and then they don't need it. Other people who have a chronic health type of diabetic condition, they have to continue on management for the rest of their life. And I think that as we moved past the very basic understanding of addiction, that we now understand it's more similar to these kinds of illnesses, and just the way that it intersects with the brain is very bizarre, and can be very difficult for people to accept and to process and to cope with because of the devastation and destruction. But I want to remind folks out there that these aren't the addiction is not the only illness that affects the brain that causes people to behave in a way that is bizarre and particularly hurtful to people around the person who's directly affected. It's one of the only ones that we blame the person for, but it's not. It's one of the only ones that commonly affects young people. Because we have out there right now. There's gosh, this nose thing is killing me. So we have dementia and Alzheimer's, conditions that are no less in any way, shape, or form heartbreaking than a family struggling with a member who has an addiction. And I think it's important to remember that we don't blame those people for what's happened to their brains, because it wasn't their doing to do that. No different than somebody whose biochemistry may differ from somebody else, and the first time they get exposed to something, just like an allergy, it does something totally different to their brain, to their biology, than somebody who is not affected that way. And I think that it's really important that we start to unpack our tendency to blame people who are sick, because it doesn't help them get better. It doesn't address the underlying need for healing, and we start at the individual level, we stop there. But the conditions that contribute to this thing happening in our society are so much larger than that. You look at several studies that have come out about ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences, and this is something I've reached out to the CDC to ask them about, because I want to know why we haven't talked about this. For every adverse childhood experience, every score that somebody gets, in early childhood when they're developing, they're 3 to 4 times more likely to develop an addiction later in life. We know this. It's been studied, tens of thousands of participants, states across the country. It's not a mystery. Yet, we have families who are chronically homeless. Fully preventable. We could be housing them immediately, and it wouldn't cost as much money as leaving them in the street. And then those children go on to develop addictions, and you wonder why. Or we leave people living in desperate poverty without access to a quality of life and ability to meet the basic needs of their children. And then those children go on to develop problems with addiction later in life. And now, this isn't the description of everybody who develops an addiction, but it's a really big piece of it. It's a really, really big piece of it. And yet somehow we're still so caught up on that individual that we've lost sight of the big moving target, the really, really big moving target, which is just the really poor quality of life that some of the families, and particularly children, have in this country that we have allowed. We've been permissive about it. And so, I understand that, again, this is where I break from traditions with AA and NA, because there's a rugged adherence to not talking about anything political or religious. And I think that's an important part of our conversation. I think that until we begin to organize ourselves to advocate for our own best interests, that historically speaking, and this is across the world throughout the entirety of human existence, there's no population of people that has experienced liberation or freedom or any kind of advancement of human rights without advocating for themselves, without organizing and advocating for themselves. And I think that we as a community need to do that, particularly we as people who are in, cannabis treatment need to be able to do that. I think that's really important because the marginalization that we've experienced by some of these groups is not acceptable. It goes against the principles of recovery. And as we begin to unpack that and talk more about what is recovery through these meetings and through having these conversations, then we'll be able to get to some common core understandings of what is recovery, and then what are these behaviors, what are these things that we're experiencing as a community, and where's the intersectionality between them? Are they something that's genuinely embraced by the principles of recovery, or do they go against the principles of recovery? And I think as we come to some better understandings of that, we'll get some really clear answers, and then hopefully we'll be able to navigate those barriers as a community and start to talk about them and start to open the doors and create some more inclusion, create some more common understanding between the recovery communities. Because right now we're so divided. We don't even, we can't even agree on whether or not an alcoholic or a drug user who's also addicted are even the same thing, even though our science already has told us that they are. Still haven't figured that out. But those are the conversations we need to have. And, I want to invite everybody to come back here every week. I really want to get into talking about the different programs. But, this is our first week, so I wanted to introduce myself, talk with you guys a little bit about my experience, qualify with you, and hopefully you guys will want to come back each week and we can learn a little bit more together. I look forward to learning from you, so I would encourage you guys to contribute through our Facebook group and through our community, because I don't know what I don't know, right? I'm only one person, and I want to share with you what I know, and hopefully you guys will want to return the favor, that I can learn something from you, and we can grow together. And I think that's what this is all about, right? Is undoing that division, those things that have kept us divided and separate, because those are the things that work against our community's healing. And I think that's what we really, at the core of this, we need. We need to be able to come together, look past our differences, and embrace our need for healing as a community, as a whole. So, I'm a little bit early tonight, but I don't want to drag this on for the sake of keeping it to time. I look forward to reading your comments in our Facebook group, and I really look forward to seeing you all next week. And I promise you, I will get into the doctor's opinion, and we'll start to talk about the disease more, and how does somebody qualify as having the disease? How do you diagnose yourself with the disease? What are the criteria? Because there are a very specific set of diagnostic criteria, and that is the basis of beginning this path. The journey towards healing is understanding what is our sickness. Do we have this sickness, and being able to embrace and accept that without any doubts or misgivings. There is a very, very specific definition that's been very well articulated for us. That's why I like to use this literature. I take what I get from it that really helps, and that's a big piece of it for me is, really understanding what is my diagnosis. For me as a patient, whether it's a patient that's working on, my recovery from addiction, or whether it's a patient and I'm dealing with ankylosing spondylitis and post-traumatic stress and not bipolar disorder and some other thing, right? Those understandings, they dictate how I approach my treatment and how I'm able to figure out how I'm going to get well again and how I'm going to stay well. So, I want to start there. I encourage, when I sponsor people, and I do sponsor people, I'm a big believer in that, having those interpersonal relationships and helping somebody to go through that process, because it is hard, that hopefully we can begin to unpack some of those understandings, and that can help some more people to start taking on this journey in a more meaningful and productive manner. because I understand in a lot of areas there's, a big shortage. There's a challenge for people looking for sponsors. There's been an explosion in the community of people who've been addicted. There's, now a higher demand for this kind of support at a level that I don't know that the existing community can meet. And so part of this too is seeing, if we can use technology to allow people to access enough of the interpersonal and the knowledge of how to work the different programs that are available to find recovery and to sustain that recovery. So I look forward to making that journey together. We're going to figure that out. I'm really, I'm really optimistic, and I'm really grateful for everybody who stopped in and checked out this video, and everybody in the following week that's going to stop by and check out this video. And I look forward to seeing your comments and seeing you all again next week. Thank you.